I hope you all are enjoying yourselves. Something that doesn't show up in the description in terms of my titles is chair of the board of Roberta's House. Roberta's House is one of the nation's only grief and loss nonprofits working in urban settings. And I am so proud to chair their board and the work that they do, and look forward to fostering a closer relationship between Black Mental Health Alliance and Roberta's House. So I want to recognize the group back there for all the work that they do, and to thank all of you for all the work that you all do. So I have the honor of presenting our next panel discussion, The State of Black Mental Health for Children, Youth, and Families. This panel will present a solution-focused message that will proactively promote and incorporate the perspectives of Black families, children, and youth in the development of a community mental health planning strategies that will lead to optimization of health and well-being, psychological health and well-being. We have two stellar presenters today. Mr. Farajii Muhammad is the Youth Empowerment Coordinator for the American Friends Service Committee in Baltimore, and he is a radio host on WEAA Radio for the culture, that's the name of the show, For the Culture with Farajii. We also are blessed to have Dr. Kimberly Jeffries Leonard, and she is the president and CEO of Envision Consulting, and she has served as deputy director for the Center of Substance Abuse Treatment at SAMHSA, and a host of other things that you can read in your program. In the interest of time, do take time and read the bios, but I want to give them their maximum time. They each will have 20 minutes for their presentation, and we're going to begin with Mr. Muhammad. So give them both a welcome, and then Mr. Muhammad.
Good afternoon. First, I want to thank all of the wonderful staff and all of the members of the Black Mental Health Alliance. I want to especially thank my big brother, Brother Richard Rowe, who invited me, Ms. Johnson, Ms. Peters, everyone that helped to make today such an important day as we talk about Black mental health. And I certainly want to thank the wonderful Church of New Shiloh for opening its doors to us, to give us an opportunity to have these very, very important conversations about the state of our people, our communities, and more importantly, about the state of the future as it relates to our children. I want to also just thank my esteemed panelists, Ms. Jeffries, just joining to be a part of this, just because when we're having these type of conversations, sometimes these, can kind of go so many different ways. Excuse me. But my hope is that as we have this conversation today, that we can all think outside of the box. I'm a young man, so I haven't like mastered psychology or sociology, but I find myself at night up on my tablet reading a lot about psychology and sociology. I think I'm a nerd because it really is a fascinating course of study to understand how people think, how we behave, and most importantly, how we interact with one another in various spaces and settings. So my conversation, or just some thoughts, excuse me, that I wanted to share with you this morning is really just some things that I see happening. I have a show called For the Culture, and it's on WEAA, selfless plug, selfish. plug. Monday through Fridays from 5 to 7 on 88.9 FM. Yes, thank you. But one of the big things that it was important for us when we first started that show, it was clear from the very beginning that we wanted to have different sets of conversation. We wanted to create a platform for us to talk about very sensitive topics, but from a very balanced and intelligent manner, not totally devoid of emotion. But we did want to open up the space to not just talk among black people. We wanted to open up the space to talk among white people, with the LGBTQ community and many other members of our community, because I think that when you talk about what's happening for the culture, and you might hear a lot of young folks say, oh, I do this for the culture. But the culture, in my understanding of it, is based upon you and me. The things that we do, the things that we accept as norms, the things that we accept as the mores of a group of people. So when we're talking about for the culture, one of the big things is let's have a very deep-rooted conversation about the things that we do and how we respond, and most importantly, how we engage one another. So that was the platform. That was the very basis and essence of starting the show. And since we started the show, one of the big things for me has been, how do I make sure that I become a catalyst to push those conversations, pushing the needles forward? Because at the end of the day, we don't just live among black people. And at the end of the day, we don't have a city just 100% black. But we need to have some new, I would say, a new perspective on some old challenges to really think outside of the box. So one of the things that I also did do in my Clark Kent days, my Clark Kent time of my 9 to 5, is that I try to, I'm a community organizer. I stepped away from, I'm no longer with American Friends Service Committee, but I work for an organization called Strong City Baltimore. Anyone familiar with Strong City? Yeah, it's like 4 people. But one of the things that I do for Strong City is I'm a community organizer. And I've been a community organizer and a community activist for nearly 20 years in the city of Baltimore. And one of the big things that I'm learning is that a lot of community organizing is based upon relationships. That's the very essence of community organizing. And so I want to start this my little remarks with you with understanding what it means to be a part of a community. Because I think we have to be very clear. We always throw the word around, the community, the community, the community. But how many of us who live in various parts of the city, you may come from the county, wherever you live, how many of us have actually have a clear understanding, a definition of what community means? And if you were to ask your neighbor, do they have the same definition that you do? Because I live in a community, I live in the Berkeley community. My view of community is much different than my neighbor's view of the community. My view of the community is about we all living in the same geographical location, but at the same time, there are some shared values. And so I say it's different because like it's been warm, and so my neighbors will come out and put that radio right there on the front and blast the music, right? Now for me, I'm like, man, jeez. And it would go for hours and hours and hours. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, just a simple thing like that. Don't have a problem with you enjoying yourself. Don't mind having a good cookout. But the cookout that lasts from 3 to 1 a.m. It's like, okay, I think we got the point. But why is it that type of situation? Because most people don't have a view of community, what that actually means to live together, to be in the same space, proximity to one another, but most importantly, let's talk about the values of one another. And here's the big thing, what about having a vision for where you live? Now, as a community organizer, one of the things that I'm finding is that there are a lot of people that live in the same neighborhood. You may or may not talk to your neighbors, depending on how you grew up, how you were raised, right? That's a part of your culture. But then even more importantly, you may not get involved in any type of community activity. You may not serve on the community association board. You may not serve on the block party committee. You may not serve on at a local school that's near your neighborhood. You don't get involved in anything. But you're part of the community, right? And one of the first things I remember talking to Ras Baraka many years ago, the former mayor of Newark, New Jersey. He said, Farajii, if you want to know the key to good organizing, he said, organizing starts with right where you are, and then it expands. It doesn't start from across the town, all the way over town. And one of the things I've learned as an activist as I grew into becoming a community organizer is really understand that I can do all these great things in West Baltimore, but if I'm living in East Baltimore, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really, I mean, it matters, but it doesn't matter as much as it could matter. So one of the things that I'm a student of is this form of community organizing, community development called assets-based community development. And assets-based community development is the opportunity for us to look at the very essence of seeing not the community from a place of deficiency, but seeing the community from a place of assets. Because oftentimes when we go into this neighborhood or that neighborhood, the first thing we often say is, what does the community need? Instead of what does the community have? And if you just did that little mental shift, that will open you up to a whole new world. I want to kind of keep it moving here. The other part of it is, once we have a clear understanding of community, we have to address some of the fundamental issues that are affecting that community, right? From a place of asset. So if we're finding that there is a high murder rate, if we're finding that there's a community that has high unemployment, if you're finding that there's a community that doesn't have as many resources as the next community, how do we change that and shift it from a place of being of black hate to a place of black love? That's the part that we're talking about. If you live in a predominantly black community, even if you live in a mixed community, some of the mixed communities don't always have the necessary resources to push the needle on the culture. All right. And we cannot forget the fact of the impact of black hate, because that's a very real thing. When I go out and talk to young people, you know, I get invited sometimes to come to and speak at graduations and whatnot. And the thing I always drive home to the next generation is, how do you see yourself? If you see yourself as the N-word or the baddest B, then that's a problem. That's a problem. So when we talk about how are the children in terms of psychology, in terms of where their thinking is, ask them, understand where their thinking is. And you ask them a simple question. I was always told that when you ask a question, that creates a reaction in your mind to start to think a little bit deeper. And so when you ask that question to the next generation, how do you see yourself? Then they are confronted with that reality of telling you who they are. All right, as we wrap up, I want to shift gears too, because as we talk about black hate, then we also have to talk about this thing called racism. Yeah. Oh man. Racism is very real. You can't barbecue while you're black. You can't drive while you're black. You can't go and get a coffee while you're black. Right? You can't stand. There was a white woman that called on a black photojournalist at the Preakness because she didn't think that he needed to be in the press box even though he had credentials? You can't take a picture while you're black? So there's a thing called racism, but more importantly, this implicit bias that exists right now. Now, we're hearing about it more and more, but it's always been around, right? And we gotta address that elephant in the room. There's a book that's coming out by a woman named Dr. Robin DiAngelo, and she wrote this book called White Fragility. I want you to just write that one down, White Fragility. And she also wrote a paper before this book, and we're gonna wrap up. I just wanted to throw this on you real quick, because I think we need to be very clear. She said, white people in North America live in a social environment that protects and insulates them from race-based stress. This insulated environment of racial protection builds white expectations for racial comfort, while at the same time lowering the ability to tolerate racial stress, leading to what I refer to as white fragility. White fragility is a state in which even a minimum amount of racial stress becomes intolerable, triggering a range of defensive moves. These defensive moves include the outward display of emotions such as anger, fear, and guilt, and behaviors such as argumentation, silence, and leaving the stress-inducing situation. These behaviors in turn function to reinstate white racial equilibrium. Is that not an accurate analysis? You know, Starbucks had their training the other day. And one of the questions, I just want to throw this out, just throwing it out there for the culture. But they asked Miss DiAngelo, Dr. DiAngelo in USA Today, they said, well, and now this is a white woman, they said, how does a white person being defensive affect a person of color? She said, quote, I often ask people of color in my workshop the simple question, how often have you tried to give white people feedback on our inevitable unawareness of racism and how that did that go well for you? She said, black people laugh, they roll their eyes, say never, rarely, we're so difficult about this, and that of course, that people of color giving feedback because they risk even more punishment with our defensiveness, our minimization, our explaining away. So we can't even really have a conversation about something that's obvious and prevalent and blatant. So when we talk about how are the children, that's where it starts. The children are not going to be so well if we as adults can't have a real conversation about something that is so paramount in dictating and shaping the identity of black children. We can't. And if we as black folks that work with children, that work with the development and the thinking and cultivation of us as a people and our mindset, we can't be afraid to delve into that either. To say, well, it's passed now because Obama was president. It hasn't passed. It's actually intensifying. So all of that to say, family, that we are at a good place, because I never think that since we asking the question, how are the children, that we are at a bad place. We're not at a bad place. We're at a good place because this is an opportunity for us to change and shift the very thinking of this country. Yes. And if we can't do it, as psychologists and sociologists, as organizers, as ministers, as neighbors, as residents, if we can't do it, then when we ask the question, how are the children are only going to respond, I'm not well because my future looks bleak, because guess what? At the end of the day, you didn't do anything to change my condition. I have a 4-year-old son, and every day he reminds me of why I do this work. 4 years old. He's a little black boy. And I have to, this is a lie to you not, Dr. Winbush, who you saw earlier, I called him when I learned that I was having a boy. And the first thing, he was the first person that I called, Dr. Winbush. And when I called him and I said, oh my gosh, Doc, I'm having a son, I was scared to death. And I said, Doc, I don't know how to be no man. He was like, Farajii, you know, Doc, Farajii, you know exactly what you need to do. Just be yourself. And I said, okay, I can do this. Now I'm learning more and more that if I'm myself and if I do all that I can for my son, then he's going to be all right. But daddy's going to pave the path. He's not growing up, well, find your own and pull up your, no, hell with that. I'm going to pave the path through the forest to give him a better place so he can take the legacy of me and my family to the next level. Otherwise, why the hell am I his parent? I thank you so much, and I'll certainly be around. Thank you.